You are Locked On Bulls Postcast, part of Locked On Sports Chicago on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Bulls Postcast here on the Locked On Sports Chicago YouTube channel. The Chicago Bulls win 126-123, down by 20 points in this game, and they come claw all the way back to get a victory over the Memphis Grizzlies. What a performance from this team. Unbelievable. Did not think that this was going to be happening tonight when they were down by 20. What a run by the bench. We'll get into that. The comeback as a whole. We'll talk about the worst part of this game, definitely the offensive success or lack thereof in the paint in this game. But man, a lot of credit goes to what this team did. And if you're here for the first time, you can find me on Twitter at JoeGeorge92, Instagram, TikTok at JoeGeorgeRadio. We do these Locked On Bulls postcasts after every single game on the Locked On Sports Chicago YouTube channel. Also doing them for the Bears, tough one yesterday, Cubs games eventually, and Notre Dame football. So lots of stuff to get into today. But man, you're down by 10 after the first quarter. It gets up to 20 points in the second. Two separate times, it gets down to 8. Ayo Dosunmu gets it down to 5 with 1:06 left in the third. And that's really when it felt like, when they crossed that 8-point threshold, that's when it felt like the Chicago Bulls had a real chance to win this basketball game. Because it didn't feel like they had one at all throughout with that comeback, because they got it down to 8, got back up to 14, back down to 8 again. Grizzlies go back on one more run, and you're just watching this team grind and grind to try to get the comeback. And finally, this team, the bench, comes through in the clutch and just pushes the pedal to the metal and really drives this comeback until the final, 8.5 minutes of the game, where the starters plus Lonzo Ball come back in and get this thing rolling. Just what a win for the Chicago Bulls tonight. I honestly cannot believe that this game happened. You don't often see 20-point comebacks in the NBA, and really in any sport. Like a comeback of that much, to see the team claw their way back down, and not only do that, do a lot of things wrong in terms of the way they played in the paint, but they fixed their turnover problem, which was a huge issue in the first and the third game. And this just might be who the Chicago Bulls are. They might just be the most Jekyll and Hyde team in the NBA this season. Games 2 and 4 are electric from the three-point line. They hit over 23s in each of those games. Today, they tied the franchise record for most threes in a basketball game. And they got it from a little bit of everyone in this one. The issues that we've seen through 4 games, the positives, the negatives of them, is that a lot of times they would ignore Vooch. And didn't have his biggest, most explosive stat padding game today, but he was really good again in this one. The bench is really what impressed me the most in this game, because the way they led this comeback to just keep grinding. And I know the Grizzlies bench is out there too, but at some point, I also thought the Grizzlies would put their starters back in, especially when Ayo gets that bucket and they get it down to 5 with 1:06 left in the third quarter. You really thought that, okay, everyone's coming back in from both sides. And Billy Donovan, to his credit, he did not do that to start the fourth quarter. I like the fact that he was leaving the guys out there to try to see how much farther they can take this. But what was interesting to me, maybe the most interesting part of this comeback, was the decision that Billy Donovan made the final 8.5 minutes of the fourth quarter. You've got your starters out there for the most part. You got Josh Giddey, Vooch, you got Zach LaVine, and Kobe White. It starts with Lonzo Ball, no Patrick Williams. Okay, that's interesting. Lonzo's going to be out there for a little bit. Patrick Williams is going to come back in. No, they run with Ayo. He's the next guy, and he's the guy who's really part of the closing group for the Bulls in this game. And honestly, my immediate reaction was, you're never going to get a rebound, even though Josh Giddey had a great day on the boards. Maybe that should just be your starting lineup. I know on the Monday episode of Locked On Bulls, which you can hear on the audio feed or Locked On Bulls on YouTube, they had a discussion about, if there was going to be changes in the starting lineup. And at the end of the game, the way it ended, I liked the idea of seeing Lonzo or Ayo back in the starting lineup, and really to help just this team with their ball movement. So I give Billy Donovan a lot of credit, for the end of the game and how he handled that, because not all coaches would do that. Some coaches will stick to their plan, to their rotation, and he's, changing it up quite a bit. We knew this going into the season, that there was going to be times when it was going to be bumpy for what this team was going to look like. We saw Modest came into the game earlier than he normally does in this one. So I like that as well. Just overall, a stellar game from Billy Donovan. Like, even when, in the last game, I felt like there was times where, the game was getting away from the Bulls and Billy Donovan was just kind of like letting it, like watching it happen and not calling timeouts. In this one, he was calling timeouts at the right moments to try to get this thing back under control. And the players deserve so much credit too, because a lot of teams might quit, especially teams that have a lot of young players, a lot of guys who don't have, any playoff success. They might just quit on this game and say, we're down by 20 points, no big deal. It's just one of 82. We're better than this. We'll get them next time. But to come back in the fashion that they did was so impressive against a really good basketball team, even without Ja Morant. I got to give the Grizzlies credit. That team is tall. That team is tough. They can hit threes. They were just dropping them in all over the place. That's a good basketball team, man. They won 50 games back-to-back years. Obviously, last year was tough for them with all the Ja Morant stuff going on. But thank goodness he wasn't playing tonight. And the Grizzlies are a team that, now that I'm, a league pass guy, I might be drawing some extra attention this season. But back to the Bulls. Zach LaVine, 30 points in this game. This guy, when he's on a heater, he's one of the best shooters in the NBA. He's not always on one. We all know that. Like, we saw the first half of the last game where he doesn't score in the first half. But when he can get it going, it's just, he's lights out from the three-point line. I would still like to see him, get back to the paint like we saw a little bit in that second game of the season versus the Bucks. But overall, a really, really great night for Zach LaVine and most of the starting lineup. Josh Giddey, look, we've talked about it. If you've been listening, thank you. Wasn't sure how to feel about Josh Giddey when he became a member of the Chicago Bulls. 4 for 10 from the field, 2 for 4 from the three-point line, 13 rebounds, 8 assists. That'll do. That'll do for Josh Giddey. Like, that's someone that will work for the Chicago Bulls and what this team is trying to accomplish this year. You will take that every single night. So Josh Giddey quickly growing on me as a player of what he can just bring to the Bulls roster. And I think I mentioned this, but the turnovers it's such a stark difference in this game. That's really going to be what we learned the most about, I think, for, through 4 games, is that when the Bulls are totally out of control, they've got no shot. And in this game, even though they were down 20 at one point, they only had 5 turnovers at that point in the game. They only ended with 9 the entire game. They only conceded 8 points off of turnovers. That's a huge difference from game to game. And that's what I would imagine on the flight back to Chicago before they play the Magic, as part of the messaging from Billy Donovan, is stop with the turnovers. This is what you can accomplish when you're not turning the basketball over. Because if you even think back to, the Pelicans game, when things start to get out of control in the opener, you start to see them unravel with the turnovers and things start to get a little bit out of control, and the game really just got away from them in that moment. And because they didn't turn the ball over today, it gave them that opportunity to just keep grinding and finding a way to get this win. And it was a good one. It was a fun one. The Bulls might not be a great basketball team this year, but I'll tell you, they're going to be a fun basketball team this year. I really don't know what to expect the rest of the season, but if it's nights like tonight, this show is going to be a lot of fun to do because they just give you entertaining things to talk about, good and bad. All right, when we get back, the bench, they deserve a lot of credit. I was going off on Ayo Dosunmu the other day because he couldn't hit a 3 to save his life. 1 for 16 to start the season. He stepped up in a major way in this game. So we'll talk about the bench and why they were the reason the Bulls won this game and came back down from 20 next year on the Locked On Bulls postcast on Locked On Sports Chicago.
Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. You missed out on the $250, but now they got the $150 for you. That still helps you out quite a lot. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. I've been telling you guys how important that is of a tool to get all the information you need on the same page where you place your bets. It just streamlines that whole process. So go to FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com. You get started with $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you win your first $5 bet. When you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a $100.
All right, the bench in this one, outstanding performance. To be on the court when it really felt like this game, took a turn for the better for the Bulls. Mentioned it there in that first segment. They kept getting it down to 8 points, but it's the bench unit, it's Io that's in, that helps this team get it back down to 5 in the third. Quickly went back up, but that was the momentum changer in this game while they were out there. I will stand on this now, I guess, for the rest of the season. He keeps proving me right. I appreciate Jalen Smith for not making me look like an idiot and saying he's one of my favorite players already on this team. 16 points, 3 of 4 from the three-point line, 7 rebounds. Great game from him. Stacey King did mention this during the broadcast. As the season continues, I am curious if we will see at some point Jalen Smith and Nikola Vucevic on the court together at one time. I'm really fascinated to see what that would look like. But another great game from him in this comeback. Julian Phillips, that dunk was nasty. And then to follow it up immediately with the 3, only 5 points. Those were his 5 points in the game, his 2 buckets. He's 2 for 6 from the field, but they were massive. That's also a major turning point when it felt like the Bulls were really going to start getting a hold of this thing. Because we saw through most of the game, they were battling the Grizzlies, but the size mismatch was kind of out of control. There's nothing you can do about that because it's just who your roster is at this point, and the Grizzlies are huge. But we were seeing a lot of balls just bounce the way of the Memphis Grizzlies. So that whole breakout play from Dalen Terry to knock the ball away and then to get the slam from Phillips, and then he hits that 3 the next possession, I believe it was. That was another one where give him a lot of credit. Looking forward to seeing more of him play basketball for the Bulls as well. Lonzo gets you 6 points in this one. Lonzo's been fun to watch. Just seeing him out there, I really enjoyed that. I've mentioned that a couple times. Just a joy to watch him play basketball again. And with what we saw at the end of the game where he's in there in the fourth quarter before Io comes in for him, I want to know, what's the plan for Lonzo Ball this season? Is there, Alonzo Ball, Josh Giddey, Jalen Smith, Nikola Vucevic, Zach LaVine lineup hanging in Billy Donovan's bag at some point? Some size, a bunch of shooting, some great passers, guys who can play good defense. That might be something we see at some point this season. So Billy Donovan does have a ton of options of what he can do. But Io is really the guy that we have to talk about the most in this game. 10 points, has never backed down from shooting the 3 ball. Like I said, he was 1 for 17 to start the season. He goes 2 for 4 from the 3-point line tonight. He has 8 rebounds himself. All grit, that guy. I love watching him play basketball. One of the surprises is when they drafted him, I just wasn't sure what his ceiling as a basketball player would be, and this might be it. There might be a little bit more that the Bulls can get out of him, but he just brings so much to this roster and what he can give you off of the bench. So they deserve the most credit, I would say, the bench unit, for getting the Bulls back in this game, because when they're making the comeback, I'm wondering, when is Zach LaVine coming back on the court? When are these guys? When is Vooch getting back out here? When are we seeing Patrick Williams back on the court? And Billy Donovan just stuck with those guys as they led the charge in this game. And they didn't just do it, those numbers we just read off are not the, sexiest numbers you will hear for our basketball players, because they did a lot of was they were great defensively. I mean, one of the things that has been picked on a lot about the Bulls through just a couple games here is the rotations, is getting to the right guy. What does Stacey King say? KYP, know your personnel. Well, those guys, they knew it. They knew exactly where they needed to be. One of those things was let Marcus Smart shoot the ball 11 times, I think it was, in the end, and not make a single bucket. That's Marcus Smart for you. Not the defensive player he once was in Boston and bricklayer on the court right now. But they kept giving him open shots because he needed it. But they did a really impressive job in this game. One side note about the away from the Bulls with the Grizzlies a little bit. Really weird, the Scottie Pippen Jr. thing still. I know Bronny's in the league, and there's this 17-year-old American USA basketball team that's filled with Carmelo Anthony and Dwayne Wade and Carlos Boozer's kids and just all these former NBA players. But Scottie Pippen Jr. has developed into a really good basketball player for the Memphis Grizzlies. That's a great find for them. But back to the Bulls, to our team, and their 126-123 win on the night. Moved to 2-2 on the season. This is a long year, but it's nights like tonight that just give you, hope and optimism for this team. And we talked about it a couple times on the last show. Going to the last game, they had played 6.5 good quarters of basketball. Last game was a mess. Tonight, they play 2 quarters of excellent basketball. And really, you could push it a little bit past that. They played, the comeback started in the second quarter. But the fact that this team, they got it back to 11 points with 9:57 in the fourth. And then they just exploded on offense. It's, it is something that I said this off the top. You don't see it a lot. Didn't really believe that the Chicago Bulls, would be capable of this. There's a lot of guys on this team that, we just don't know about in these big time situations. And from the bench to the starters, they came through in a very positive way. And Billy Donovan was just, he was pulling the strings like a great puppeteer tonight and just really getting this thing going in a big way. And so you give him credit for, sticking with his guys, making the switch out, for the starters at the right time, making the closing rotation a little bit different than your starters. But just a phenomenal win for the Chicago Bulls. Long season to go. Don't know how many more of these we will honestly see. I think the over-under was at 28.5 on the season. I still think they're going to hit the over on that, and it's because, as long as they don't start unloading, their best players, there's still a lot of talent on this roster, and any given night in the NBA, you can see a lot of crazy things happen. They've got wins over the Milwaukee Bucks and the Memphis Grizzlies this season. Those are 2 good basketball teams. Weird schedule so far, a trend to I'm keeping my eye on, because I thought Ja Morant was going to play tonight. Zion and Ja, you don't see out there. When the Bulls are the back-to-back team, and I know that wasn't the case here, but will teams view the Bulls as we'll give that guy a night off here? It's just something to keep an eye on of what people think of the Chicago Bulls this season. But a great 126-123 win for the Chicago Bulls. Head home and take on the Orlando Magic coming up on a Wednesday night, I believe. So we'll be here on the Locked On Sports Chicago YouTube channel and on the Locked On Bulls audio feed as well. When we get back, there's one thing we got to talk about, really 2 things from this game that I do view as a negative for the Chicago Bulls, and one of them is fixable. One of them I'm not so sure about. We'll do that next year on the Locked On Bulls postcast. I'm Joe George on the Locked On Sports Chicago YouTube channel. Game time. Easy to get tickets to your game. Let's take a look at what's coming up on Wednesday night at the United Center. It's so easy. I love using Game Time. It's my go-to app all the time to get tickets, whether it's right before the game. I love how they drop down in value and you see it. They show you the percentage that it's dropping. It's always great to use Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite team play live even easier. And look, it's not just for games. It's not just for seeing the Bears and the Bulls and the Cubs and Notre Dame and If you want to see the White Sox, you can see them too. Jerry Reinsdorf will take your money. Wouldn't recommend it, but he'll do it. Also, you can use it for concerts as well. So if Post Malone, anyone is coming to town, playing at Soldier Field, my favorite concert I've ever been to was at Soldier Field, Justin Timberlake and Jay-Z. So you can use Gametime for that as well. So it's not just for games. You can use it for concerts. My favorite feature is the panoramic views from the seats. Huge win. I tell my friends that if they've never been to Wrigley Field and they're using Gametime, great feature because you never know when you're going to get stuck behind a pole at Wrigley Field. So that panoramic view helps you out a ton. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime picks. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime. What time is it? It's game time. All right, one thing we got to talk about that's a negative, a big negative with this game. It is a trend that we saw from the previous game as well. I got my notes here for today's show are so discombobulated. I'm telling you guys, if you're listening right now, because they read as negative as they can be, but then they came back and they won this game. At one point, the Bulls were outscored 36-14 in the paint. Actually, that was in the first half. Overall, in this game, it did not get much better. Frankly, it only got worse. Final tally here, points in the paint, 70-36 for the Memphis Grizzlies. What I find interesting, again, about the Bulls and what's happening in these last two games is that when the Bulls are down 68-54 at the end of the half, and they're being outscored 36-14 points in the paint, the Bulls are shooting 11 of 23. They were at 50% until the heave at the end of the quarter. And the Grizzlies are shooting 10 for 26 from the three-point line. So for the second straight game in a row, the Bulls are going shot for shot from the three-point line with their opponent. Yet they're losing by quite a few points. And it's because the offensive rebounds, which was a huge problem. At one point, it was like 14-2. It only got worse for that as well, where the Grizzlies were just getting boards and putting them back up and having success constantly against the Chicago Bulls. That goes back to what Stacey King was saying, what I had mentioned. The idea of a Jalen Smith, Nikola Vucevic lineup. Like, what does that look like when you are just getting out-rebounded constantly and your team is just falling behind because the team you're playing is just getting easy up-and-down buckets and just really making a struggle fest for your team. But the points in the paint, that's the one where I do question the longevity of this style of basketball, because we saw the running and how effective it was, the pace that they want to play with. And when they were making shots and it's working, they can run up the score up and down on you. We've seen it in New Orleans. We've seen it versus Milwaukee. We saw it tonight in the comeback. But at some point, you have to get contribution in the paint, whether that's consistently going to Vooch more. Again, they pointed out, because I can tell how much it pisses Stacey King off, how many times Nikola Vucevic is open or has a body advantage by a wide margin of someone in the paint, and they just don't pass him the ball. They're not even looking for him, so they're missing out on those opportunities, and then they're not getting they're not getting defensive rebounds that are leading to easy second chance points for their opponent. And they're just not getting any success in the paint from offense. We saw Zach LaVine a little bit towards the end of the game start to attack again in the paint. He tried to do, his kind of version of the Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant turnaround jump shot. Didn't go in tonight, but more of that. That's what they need more of. They need, I'd like to see if Lonzo still has that in his bag a little bit. We haven't seen a ton of that from him. He's kind of sticking around the perimeter. We saw Josh Giddey be effective in the fourth quarter attacking the paint. Getting that earlier from him is something that I would be looking for a lot from the Chicago Bulls this season. So that's really the biggest negative from this game, and it's the reason why they were down 20, because they were outscored by 22 points in the first half, points in the paint, and they were down by 14. So they were just getting bullied constantly in that position, and it just continued throughout the game, but they started just racking up buckets one after another. And really the change is that's when the second chance points slowed down very significantly for the Memphis Grizzlies. So I don't know if I'm curious to listen to the press conference from Billy Donovan tonight and to hear if there was some kind of adjustment that was made. But I mean, look at these numbers. They don't even look that bad, actually. 18 offensive rebounds for the Grizzlies, 11 for the Bulls. Feels like a lot of those 11 offensive rebounds came towards the end of the game when they finally finished off this 20-point comeback. But great win for the Chicago Bulls. They're 2-2 on the season. We got a long way to go. 78 games of regular season basketball with whatever the NBA Cup is mixed in between. And maybe we'll get lucky this year and we'll see the Bulls play in a playing game. But nights like tonight is where there's still something here with this roster and with this offense of what the Chicago Bulls can be. It's why you can't quit them. It's why we all love them. It's why we all hate them, because they can be down by 20 apparently and then come back. And now, if you turn the game off tonight, you won't do that again. You'll be locked in if you can watch the game in Chicago, which if you're watching or listening and you cannot watch the game still because this new TV network is struggling to find partners, shout out to you for hanging out with us, because we know it's a grind. We know that, dealing with that stuff is always the worst as a fan, that you don't get to see your team play on television. Sometimes you have to find an antenna and go back old school, like I know a lot of people are doing in Chicago, trying to find a way to watch the Bulls, the Blackhawks, and maybe the White Sox this year. My name is Joe George. You can find me on Twitter at JoeGeorge92. It's a brand new account, so give me a follow there. All my Chicago sports content will be living on that Twitter account, Instagram, and TikTok at Joe George Radio. Thanks for hanging out here on the Locked On Bulls postcast. Just a reminder, if you're just joining us and watching us, we do these after every single Bulls, Bears, Notre Dame, and eventually Cubs games this season right here on the Locked On Sports Chicago YouTube channel. If you ever miss it and don't want to watch on video, the audio is available on the Locked On Bulls audio feed as well with their regular show that they've got going on. So that does it for us. We'll be back on Wednesday night after the Chicago Bulls take on the Orlando Magic. We will talk to you then. Have a good one. Great win for the Bulls to move to 2-2 on the season and winning 126-123 over the Memphis Grizzlies.